You know that moment when your own family treats you like garbage for years, and you just take it because you love them? Well, I finally reached my breaking point when my siblings literally tried to evict me from our family cabin. Little did they know, I had the ultimate trump card that would flip their world upside down in 24 hours. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let me know where you're listening from in the comments. I never thought my own family would treat me like their personal servant at our cabin, making me do all the work while they relaxed, until they crossed a line that changed everything forever. My name is Riley and I'm 28 years old. I work as a freelance graphic designer, which means my schedule is flexible, but my income isn't always predictable. That detail becomes important later, trust me. I'm the last child in the Blackwood family, sandwiched between my older brother Garrett, who's 32 and thinks he's God's gift to the legal profession, and my sister Brooke, who's 30 and has been bitter about everything since her divorce 2 years ago. Our story begins 2 years ago at Dad's funeral. Frank Blackwood was the glue that held our family together, the peacekeeper who somehow managed to keep Garrett's ego and Brooke's drama from tearing us apart. As we stood around his casket, we all made promises through our tears. We'd stick together. We'd honor his memory. We'd keep the family traditions alive, especially our summers at the cabin. The cabin? God, where do I even start with that place? It's this beautiful rustic retreat nestled in the mountains, overlooking a pristine lake that sparkles like diamonds in the morning sun. Dad bought it 20 years ago when his construction business really took off, and it became our sanctuary. Every summer, we'd spend weeks there swimming, fishing, barbecuing, and just being a family. Those were the golden days, before everything turned toxic. After Dad died, we decided to maintain the tradition. It's what he would have wanted, Garrett said, and for once, Brooke and I agreed with him completely. But slowly, insidiously, things began to change. It started small. That first summer without Dad, I arrived at the cabin a day early to get everything ready. I told myself it was just being helpful, honoring Dad's memory by making sure everything was perfect. I scrubbed the bathrooms, swept the cobwebs from the corners, stocked the refrigerator with everyone's favorite foods, and made sure the beds had fresh sheets. When Garrett arrived with his wife Tiffany, they barely acknowledged the work I'd done. "Thanks, Riley," Garrett said absently, already cracking open a beer and heading to the deck. By the second summer, it had become an expectation. I'd arrive early to clean and prepare, and I'd stay late to clean up after everyone left. Somewhere along the way, I'd been designated as the unofficial caretaker, though nobody ever actually asked me if I wanted the job. Garrett would spend his days on the lake with his fishing rod, talking loudly about his latest courtroom victories while Tiffany sunbathed and complained about the Wi-Fi signal. Brooke would park herself on the deck with a bottle of wine, venting about her ex-husband and the challenges of single motherhood while her kids ran wild. And me? I was in the kitchen, cooking elaborate meals for everyone, or scrubbing grass stains out of towels, or organizing the storage room that somehow became my designated bedroom. Yes, you heard that right. Somewhere along the line, I'd been relegated to sleeping in what used to be a storage room. Garrett and Tiffany claimed the master bedroom because they needed the space. Brooke took the second bedroom because the kids need to be close to mommy. And I got a converted storage room with a tiny window and a bed that was probably older than I was. But I made excuses for them. I always made excuses. Garrett worked so hard, I'd tell myself when he'd spend entire days lounging while I scrubbed floors. He deserves to relax. When Brooke would dump dish duty on me because she was too stressed, I'd think she's dealing with the divorce and the kids. I should be supportive. When Tiffany would make snide comments about my flexible schedule while I cooked dinner for the fourth night in a row, I'd justify it. She's new to the family. I should make her feel welcome. The financial burden gradually shifted to me too. The cabin needed a new water heater. Somehow I was the one researching options and paying the repair bill. The deck needed staining. I'd spend my weekend doing the labor and my money on supplies. Groceries for the week. Riley's going to town anyway, she can grab everything. I kept detailed mental notes of every expense, every hour of labor, every moment of unpaid service, but I never said anything. Because they were family. Because Dad would have wanted us to stick together. Because I was terrified that if I complained, they'd stop including me altogether. The gaslighting was subtle but constant. When I'd tentatively mention feeling unappreciated, Garrett would roll his eyes and say, "Here we go again. Riley's being dramatic." Brooke would sigh and mutter, "You're too sensitive, Riley. We're family. Family helps each other." Tiffany would give me that fake sympathetic smile and suggest maybe I needed to work on my communication skills. I began to believe them. Maybe I was too sensitive. Maybe I was being dramatic. Maybe this was just what family looked like, and I was the problem for expecting acknowledgement or gratitude. But last month, something shifted. I was cleaning up after another family weekend when I overheard Garrett on his phone with someone talking about bringing a real estate appraiser to evaluate our investment. My blood ran cold. Investment? Since when was our family sanctuary an investment? That conversation planted a seed of dread that's been growing ever since. And as you'll soon discover, my instincts were absolutely right to be worried. That appraiser comment haunted me for weeks, but nothing could have prepared me for what happened next. It was a beautiful Saturday morning in July when my world completely shattered. I'd driven up to the cabin expecting our usual weekend routine, but instead, I walked into an ambush that would change everything. I should have known something was wrong the moment I arrived. Garrett, Brooke, and Tiffany were all sitting around the deck table with serious expressions, like they were waiting for me. There were papers spread out in front of them, and Garrett had that lawyer look on his face, the one he gets when he thinks he's about to win a case. "Riley, we need to talk," Garrett said, gesturing to the empty chair across from them. The way they were positioned felt intentional, like a tribunal. Me on one side, the three of them on the other. My heart started pounding, but I tried to keep my voice steady. "Okay, what's going on?" Tiffany cleared her throat and gave me what she probably thought was a caring look. "We've been discussing your situation, and we're concerned about you." "My situation? What do you mean?" Brooke leaned forward, her expression a mixture of pity and frustration. "Riley, you're 28 years old, and you're still struggling with this freelance thing. We think it's time for some tough love." I felt my stomach drop. "I'm not struggling. My work is going fine." Garrett shook his head. "Come on, Riley. You can barely afford to contribute meaningfully to this place. We've been carrying you for years." The words hit me like a physical blow. Carrying me? I'd been the one carrying them. I'd paid for repairs, bought groceries, maintained the property while they treated it like their personal resort. But before I could find my voice, Tiffany jumped in. "We're not trying to be mean," she said with that saccharine tone that made my skin crawl. "We just think you need motivation to get your life together. Maybe find a real job with benefits and stability." A real job. As if my work wasn't real because I didn't sit in an office wearing a suit. Brooke pulled out a calculator and started rattling off numbers. "We've done the math. Between utilities, property taxes, maintenance, and general upkeep, your fair share should be about $1,200 a month." My mouth fell open. $1,200. "Well," Garrett said, sliding a piece of paper toward me, "we're willing to be generous. $800 for rent, since you're only using the small room, plus $400 for your share of utilities and maintenance." Rent. They wanted to charge me rent to stay in what had been our family cabin. I stared at the paper. It was an actual lease agreement, typed up with legal language and everything. They'd been planning this for months. "This is insane," I whispered. "This is our family cabin. Dad left it to all of us." "Dad left us a responsibility," Garrett said coldly. "And part of that responsibility is making sure everyone contributes equally. You've been freeloading long enough." Freeloading. The word felt like a slap across the face. All those early mornings scrubbing floors, all those late nights doing dishes, all those repair bills I'd quietly paid, apparently none of that counted as contributing. "What if I can't afford it?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Brooke shrugged. "Then you'll need to find somewhere else to spend your summers. Maybe it'll motivate you to get serious about your career." I looked at each of their faces, searching for any sign of the family I thought I knew. Garrett looked smug, like he'd already won. Tiffany was trying to look sympathetic but couldn't hide her satisfaction. And Brooke just looked tired, like this was an unpleasant chore she wanted to get over with. "You guys can't be serious," I said, my voice cracking. "We promised Dad we'd stick together." "Dad would want us to be practical," Brooke said firmly. "He'd understand that we can't carry dead weight forever." Dead weight. That's what I was to them. Dead weight. Something inside me snapped. Not into anger, not yet, but into a cold, crystalline clarity. For the first time in years, I stopped making excuses for them. I stopped telling myself they didn't mean it, that they were just stressed or overwhelmed or going through a hard time. I saw them clearly for what they were: people who had taken my love and generosity and twisted it into something they felt entitled to. "I need 24 hours to think about this," I said, surprising myself with how calm my voice sounded. Garrett nodded approvingly. That's reasonable. But Riley, we're not negotiating on the terms. Either you agree to the lease or you need to make other arrangements. As I sat there looking at their expectant faces, something occurred to me. They kept talking about our property and the family investment and what we inherited. But there was something nagging at the back of my mind, something about Dad's will that I'd never paid close attention to before. Fine, I said, standing up. 24 hours. I walked to my car without another word, my mind racing. They thought they held all the cards, thought they could bully me into submission just like they had for the past 2 years. But as I drove away from the cabin, I realized there might be something they didn't know, something important, and I was going to find out exactly what Dad had really left us. The next morning, I barely slept. I kept replaying their words over and over. Dead weight freeloading carry you for years. By dawn, I was already dressed and ready to uncover the truth that had been nagging at me. I drove straight to the county recorder's office, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tight that my knuckles were white. The elderly clerk behind the counter must have sensed my urgency because she expedited my request for all property records related to our family cabin. This might take a few minutes, honey, she said kindly. Property records can be complicated, especially older ones. While I waited, I called Dad's lawyer, Mr. Henderson, who had handled the estate. Riley, dear, what can I do for you? His familiar voice answered. Mr. Henderson, I need to ask you about the cabin property. I'm looking at some family decisions, and I want to make sure I understand Dad's will correctly. There was a pause. Well, you know the cabin building was left to all 3 children equally. But Riley, did you ever look at the land deed? My heart started pounding. What do you mean? Your father was very specific about his intentions. He left detailed instructions about how the property should be handled. I assumed you children had discussed this among yourselves by now. We haven't discussed the specifics. Can you tell me exactly what the will says about the land? Another pause, longer this time. Riley, I think you should come see me today. Bring the property records when they're ready. There are some things your father wanted you to know. 2 hours later, I was sitting in Mr. Henderson's office with a stack of documents in front of me. What I discovered made my hands shake with a mixture of vindication, fury, and overwhelming grief for my father's wisdom. The cabin structure, the actual building, was indeed left to all 3 of us equally, just like Garrett had smugly reminded me yesterday. But the land itself, all 5 gorgeous acres of pristine waterfront property worth easily $500,000, was deeded solely to me. Riley Blackwood, my name only. Your father came to me about 8 months before he passed, Mr. Henderson explained gently. He was very troubled about some family dynamics he'd been observing. He said he'd watched your siblings take advantage of your generous nature for years, and he was worried about what would happen after he was gone. I stared at the deed, my name printed clearly in legal black ink. But why didn't he tell me? He hoped he'd never have to. He said if you were all treating each other fairly, you'd never need to know about this arrangement. But if things went badly... He handed me a sealed envelope with my name on it in Dad's familiar handwriting. He left this for you. With trembling fingers, I opened the letter that would change everything. My dearest Riley, it began, and I could almost hear Dad's voice speaking the words. If you're reading this, it means you've discovered what I hoped you'd never need to know. Over the years, I've watched your brother and sister take advantage of your generous heart. I've seen them treat you like hired help while you've loved them unconditionally. I've watched you make excuses for behavior that frankly disgusted me, because you have such a beautiful, forgiving soul. But I also knew that one day, your kindness might be used against you in ways that could truly hurt you. So I made a decision. The cabin building belongs to all 3 of you because you're all my children, and I love you all. But the land, the most valuable part, the part that makes the cabin possible, belongs to you alone. You were the only one who ever loved that place for what it was, not what it could get you. When Garrett looked at the cabin, I saw $signs in his eyes. When Brooke talked about it, she spoke about impressing her friends or using it as a party venue. But you, my sweet girl, you talked about the sunrise over the lake, the sound of the loons at night, the peace you felt there. You understood that some things are more valuable than money. I pray you never have to use this knowledge as a weapon. But if they push you too far, remember that you are not the weak one in this family, you are the strongest. You have been carrying them emotionally and practically for years, and they have been too selfish to see it. Use this knowledge wisely, my darling daughter. You deserve so much better than how they've been treating you. All my love, Dad. P.S. I also prepaid the property taxes for the next 10 years. That was always your money they were talking about when they discussed expenses. I sat in Mr. Henderson's office crying for 20 minutes. Not just from the pain of Dad's validation of what I'd been experiencing, but from the overwhelming love I felt from him, even after death. He had protected me in the most powerful way possible. The legal implications are clear, Mr. Henderson explained once I'd composed myself. You own the land. The cabin structure belongs to all three of you, but without your permission, it's essentially worthless since it can't exist without somewhere to sit. Your siblings have been operating under a false assumption about their ownership rights. I spent the rest of the afternoon gathering additional documentation, making copies of everything, and preparing for what I knew would be the most important conversation of my life. I also called my own lawyer. Yes, I had one, contrary to what my siblings seemed to think about my unstable freelance lifestyle, to confirm my legal position. By evening, I had a complete legal brief that would have made Garrett proud, if it hadn't been designed to destroy his entire worldview. 23 hours after their ultimatum, I returned to the cabin. I'd barely slept, spending the night rehearsing exactly what I was going to say and how I was going to say it. I wanted to savor every moment of what was about to happen. I pulled into the driveway and saw them exactly where I'd expected, lounging on the deck like they owned the place. Garrett was grilling burgers, beer in hand, probably celebrating what he thought was his victory over me. Brooke was scrolling through her phone while her kids played in the yard. Tiffany was reading a magazine, her feet up on the deck railing like she was the queen of the castle. They barely looked up when I approached, and that casual dismissiveness fueled the fire building in my chest. Well? Garrett asked without even turning away from the grill, not bothering to hide his smugness. Have you made your decision? Are you going to be reasonable, or do we need to start looking for a new family cabin arrangement? I set my leather folder on the deck table. I'd brought my professional portfolio case for maximum effect, and smiled. Genuinely smiled for the first time in months. Actually, I said, my voice steady and clear, I have a counterproposal. Brooke looked up from her phone, rolling her eyes dramatically. Riley, we told you yesterday, the terms aren't negotiable. $800 for rent, $400 for expenses, or find somewhere else to go. Oh, but they are negotiable, I said, opening my folder with deliberate slowness. See, I spent yesterday doing some research, and I discovered something absolutely fascinating about property ownership and inheritance law. I pulled out the first document, the original deed to the property, and placed it in front of them like I was dealing cards in a poker game where I held all the aces. This is the official deed to the 5 acres this cabin sits on. Notice anything interesting about the ownership line? Garrett dropped his grilling tongs and snatched the paper, his face immediately beginning to drain of color as he read. This can't be right. There has to be some mistake. No mistake, I said cheerfully. That's the original deed, filed with the county 2 years ago when Dad's will was executed. Fascinating reading, really. Tiffany leaned over Garrett's shoulder, squinting at the document. I don't understand. What does this mean? It means, I said, pulling out the second document, that Dad left the cabin building to all 3 of us equally. But the land itself, you know, the part that makes owning a cabin actually possible, that belongs entirely to me. The silence that followed was absolutely delicious. I could practically hear their minds racing, trying to process this information and figure out what it meant for their carefully laid plans. Brooke was the first to speak, her voice rising to that shrill pitch she got when she was panicking. That's impossible. We would have known about this. Mr. Henderson would have told us. Would he? When was the last time any of you actually looked at legal documents, instead of just assuming you knew what they said? I pulled out Dad's letter. Dad even left me an explanation. I unfolded the letter slowly, savoring their increasingly horrified expressions, and began to read aloud. My dearest Riley, if you're reading this, it means you've discovered what I hoped you'd never need to know. Over the years, I've watched your brother and sister take advantage of your generous heart. I've seen them treat you like hired help while you've loved them unconditionally. As I read Dad's words, I watched Garrett's face go through several colors, red, white, then a sickly green. Brooke looked like someone had just told her she'd lost custody of her children. And Tiffany? Tiffany looked like she was calculating how much money had just evaporated from her future. You were the only one who ever loved that place for what it was, not what it could get you, I continued, making sure to emphasize those particular words while looking directly at each of them. This is insane, Garrett stammered, his lawyer training finally kicking in. Even if this is legitimate, you can't seriously be thinking of using this against your own family. We can contest this. I know property law. Do you? I asked, pulling out another document. Because I spent this morning with my lawyer. Yes, Garrett, I have a lawyer, shocking as that might be to someone who thinks freelancers are barely functional adults, and she confirmed that property law is very, very clear on this matter. I placed the legal brief on the table. Land ownership trumps structural ownership every single time. Without the landowner's permission, your cabin is essentially worthless because it has nowhere to legally exist. Brooke leaned forward desperately, and for the first time in years, I heard genuine pleading in her voice instead of demands or criticism. Riley, you can't seriously be thinking of using this against us. We're family. We were just trying to help you become more independent. Family, I repeated slowly, tasting the word. You mean like when you called me dead weight yesterday? Or when you said Dad would understand that you can't carry dead weight forever? That kind of family love and support. The shame that flashed across Brooke's face was almost worth the years of abuse. Almost. Tiffany, clearly desperate to salvage the situation, tried her manipulative sweet-talk approach. Riley, honey, this is obviously just a big misunderstanding. We were worried about you, that's all. We can work something out that's fair for everyone. Fair, I said, nodding thoughtfully. I like that word. Let's talk about fair. I pulled out my phone and opened the calculator app. Over the past 2 years, I've kept track of every expense I've covered for this place. New water heater $1,200. Deck staining and repairs $800. Weekly groceries during cabin season roughly $200 per week for 12 weeks each summer. That's $4,800. Cleaning supplies, maintenance items, emergency repairs. I scrolled through my meticulous records, watching their faces grow more horrified with each number. In total, I estimate I've spent approximately $12,000 of my own money maintaining what you now call the family investment. That doesn't include the hundreds of hours of unpaid labor I've provided as your personal housekeeper, cook, and groundskeeper. Garrett tried to interrupt. We never asked you to. No, you didn't ask, I agreed. You just expected it. And when I did it, you treated it like it was my obligation rather than my gift to the family. I stood up and walked to the deck railing, looking out over the lake that I now legally owned. So here's my counterproposal, and unlike yesterday, this one really isn't negotiable. I turned back to face them, and I could see in their expressions that they finally understood the magnitude of their situation. You own a cabin. Congratulations. But that cabin is currently trespassing on my land without my permission. So you have exactly 24 hours to remove your property from my land. The explosion of protests that followed was everything I had hoped for and more. You can't be serious, Garrett shouted. Do you have any idea what it would cost to relocate an entire cabin? We're talking about tens of thousands of dollars, probably about the same amount I've invested in maintaining your vacation spot over the years, I replied sweetly. But hey, look on the bright side, you'll finally be contributing your fair share to cabin expenses. Brooke's composure completely cracked. Riley, please. The kids love this place. They've been coming here every summer since they were babies. You can't just destroy their childhood memories over some stupid family argument. Stupid family argument. The calm I'd been maintaining finally cracked a little. You mean the argument where you collectively decided I was worthless and tried to extort rent money from me for the privilege of being your unpaid servant? Tiffany was frantically whispering to Garrett, probably calculating their financial exposure. I could see the panic in her eyes as she realized that their summer vacation paradise was about to become a very expensive problem. Look, Garrett said, switching to his courtroom negotiation voice, we can all be reasonable here. Obviously, there was a miscommunication yesterday. We're willing to discuss a more equitable arrangement. Oh, I'm sure you are, I said, now that you realize you have absolutely no leverage whatsoever. I let them stew in that reality for a moment before continuing. But you know what? Despite everything you've put me through, I'm not completely heartless. I might consider allowing you to keep the cabin on my land, as my guests, following my rules. After you apologize, genuinely apologize, for 2 years of treating me like garbage. The next few hours were perhaps the most satisfying of my entire life. I watched them make frantic phone calls to contractors, getting estimates for cabin relocation. The quotes they received were astronomical, more than any of them could afford without taking out major loans. Garrett tried calling his lawyer friend for advice on contesting the will, only to be told that Dad's estate planning was bulletproof and that property law wouldn't give him any wiggle room. Brooke actually broke down crying when she realized her kids might lose their summer tradition because of how badly she treated me. And Tiffany? Tiffany spent most of the afternoon in the car on the phone, probably trying to explain to someone why their retirement cabin investment had just turned into a massive liability. By sunset, they were completely defeated. They came to me individually, not as the united front they'd presented yesterday, but as separate, desperate people who finally understood what they'd lost through their own cruelty. 3 days later, they came crawling back with a formal apology and a request for mercy. Not with anger this time, not with demands or ultimatums, but with genuine desperation and the first real remorse I'd seen from any of them in years. "You're right," Garrett said, and I could tell how much it cost his ego to admit it. "We treated you terribly. We took advantage of your kindness, and we convinced ourselves it was normal because it was convenient for us." Brooke was crying. "I was so angry about my divorce, and instead of dealing with my own problems, I took it out on you. You were an easy target because you never fought back. That was wrong. That was so wrong." Even Tiffany managed what sounded like a genuine apology. "I was jealous of how much this place meant to you, and I wanted to make it more mine and less yours. I encouraged Garrett to see you as a problem instead of appreciating what you contributed." "You're right," I said finally, after letting them apologize fully. "We are family. And maybe it's time we started acting like it." I didn't make them move the cabin. Instead, I drew up new terms, real terms, fair terms. They could continue using the cabin, but as guests on my property, not as owners of some mythical family investment. They would contribute equally to expenses, real expenses, not the inflated numbers they'd tried to stick me with yesterday. Most importantly, they would treat me with the respect I'd always deserved. The dynamic shifted overnight. Suddenly, I wasn't the family doormat anymore. I wasn't the one scrambling to please everyone else. I was the property owner, the one holding all the cards, the one who got to decide how our family traditions would continue. And you know what? It felt absolutely incredible. Dad had protected me even after he was gone, seeing through their behavior when I'd been too blinded by love to see it myself. He'd given me the ultimate trump card and trusted me to know when and how to play it. The best part? They're actually better people now. When someone can't take advantage of you anymore, they're forced to interact with you as an equal. Our family relationships have never been healthier, because now they're built on mutual respect instead of my one-sided sacrifice. Thank you for listening. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and feel free to share your story or opinions in the comments.